Welcome to Monrovia, California. Not to be confused with the capital Liberia or the other random city in Indiana. If you went to Monrovia High School, you know what I'm talking about. If you tried looking it up, that's what pops up. Monrovia is just around 30 minutes away from LA on a good day, and we don't get a lot of those around here. Despite all the traffic in Monrovia, it's actually a really beautiful town, and I lived there for a number of years. Don't anymore, but for the number of years I lived there, I had virtually no idea about the history about the town. If you know anything about general California history, you probably know about ranchos. Ranchos were a very important part of it. The rancho system itself was a system put into place by Spain when they dished out land grants to basically the important people who were rich people, soldiers, or settlers. Unfortunately for you, today we will not be talking about tuberculosis. There is a whole sanatorium, and there's this dude named Francis Pottinger. I'd encourage you to look on that because Southern California has a really deep history on that, but that's not what we're talking about today. Now that we have a very brief context on what the rancho systems were, I want to go into the specific ranchos that Monrovia resided on before it became Monrovia, because it wasn't really a town until James Monroe got it. If you aren't from the area, Rancho Santa Anita wouldn't be a familiar name, but if you are, you've heard of the Santa Anita Mall, which is kind of a sad downfall from how beautiful it was, but whatever. Ranchos in general relied on cattle ranching for its beginnings, but unfortunately, there were a series of droughts, which we'll get into later, that led the ranchos to move to a more agricultural based way of functioning. And both ranchos really loved farming citrus, and you can see that throughout different signs of surrounding towns and even in Monrovia. A precursor to before I explain both the ranchos, there are no remaining pictures of either owner, which I find kind of sad. It's actually kind of lost history. But anyways, let's get into Rancho Santa Anita. Rancho Santa Anita's original owner was Hugo Reed. He seemed like a pretty good person from the papers he wrote, because he actually respected the Native Americans who were on the land. He wrote a series of letters detailing the customs and uses of the land, which was actually a pretty valuable insight since there weren't a lot at the time of when he wrote those. Also detailed in the letters, he described the land as the king of cow counties, which basically just illustrates how much cattle was emphasized on all of the ranchos in the surrounding area. Now, for both ranchos, there were a series of land transfer ownerships, but the main one we need to remember is Hugo Reed sold the land to Henry Dalton, which will come into play for our second rancho that we're going to discuss. Moving on to the second rancho, Rancho Azusa de Duarte, this one I actually enjoy the history of a little bit more. I've always seen the statue of some like random cowboy going down Huntington, but I never really stopped to think about who that was, but that was actually the owner of the rancho. Andres Duarte, who was pictureless besides the statue, of course, served in the Mexican military starting at only 16. He eventually got the land for the rancho in 1841 after petitioning for a grant and getting it from Mexico, getting 6,500 acres, which is a lot of land. He had to live on a land, so he ended up building an adobe, also helped by the natives such as Hugo Reed. Duarte struggles with the downfall of cattle were more emphasized when I was doing my research on the topic, and that led Dalton to buy Azusa de Duarte first, before buying Rancho Santa Anita. I've mentioned probably several times now that both ranchos struggled with cattle, but I haven't really discussed why, but that was because a series of droughts, like it was bad. 1856 and 1863 are more prominent years mentioned, but PBS has an article mentioning 1795 had been a drought, 1807, 1809, 1822, 1823, and then there were floods in 1825. And if you live in California, you know we do not handle water well, especially after a drought. Then there was little to no rain in 1827, 1829, 1844, 1846. Of course, cows need grass to eat, And there was none of it because all of it was dried up because of the California heat. So a lot of cows died, which makes me sad because cows are cute. But more importantly, that's the reason we switched from cattle to agriculture, more specifically, any citrus trees. There are numbers of pictures, and it's literally orange trees as far as you could see. After Henry Dalton came into the ownership of both land that the ranchos were previously on, a man by the name of Lucky Baldwin came and bought them up. If you know the general history of the surrounding area that Monrovia is in, Lucky Baldwin is a very prominent figure. There's actually a city named Baldwin Park not too far off from it. Yes, those are connected. Anyways, Lucky Baldwin put the plots of land on sale, and someone by the name of William N. Monroe came with some friends from his city council, since he was on the LA City Council, and bought the land that is now Monrovia today. When I moved here in elementary, the only history I really knew, well, actually, it wasn't a lot, but I kind of assumed the origins of Monrovia itself were that it was woods until whoever Mr. Monroe was bought up the land and made it Monrovia like one day. But no, of course, we know this now, that has a very complex history, and it gives us a window into the general trend that a lot of Southern California had around this time, which was mid 1800s. I hope you feel educated now on the history of Monrovia. It's a nice little town. I'd recommend you visit if you haven't already. And thank you for listening.